The Trump Organization and the CFO both charged with 15 counts of alleged fraud. That sounds pretty bad, but when you start to sort of decipher this, what is this really all about? It's kind of all about taxes and about like improper reporting of taxes, something that basically everybody in America does. And so we've been asking ourselves here, is this a legitimate prosecution or is this a political prosecution? And based on sort of the other patterns that we've seen out of this administration, it certainly feels to me like this is absolutely a political prosecution. And so we're going to go through this and see what we can extract out of this. We're going to get some background over here from CBS News. They gave us an update today, this afternoon. They say that lawyers for the Trump Organization and its top executives, they pled not guilty to a slew of charges in Lower Manhattan courtroom on Thursday. So that was today. Prosecutors alleged that there was a 16-year scheme of fraud and tax evasion by Donald Trump and his company, not the president, but the former president, his company. So a grand jury came back, 15-count indictment. They've got Allen Weisselberg, the chief CFO, the late Wednesday evening. Prosecutors from the Manhattan Attorney's Office, they detailed the crimes in a 25-page indictment. We're going to take a look at some of that. The indictment alleged that the company and Weisselberg orchestrated a scheme to funnel more than $1.7 million in indirect employee compensation to the executive from 2005 to 2021. So 16 years of data they went back just to go and try to extract this charge. Okay. Prosecutors said the Trump Organization failed to properly report the payment to tax authorities, right? So it's a reporting violation. So you can, if you've ever sat down at a lunch or something like that and said, oh, hey, did we talk business? Yeah, we did. Oh, that's a business expense. And we're just going to write that off, right? How many business owners in America have ever done that? Every single one of them, right? We all joke about it. All those, maybe this is just lawyers that do this, but, oh yeah, we talk business. Oh, that's a write-off. And then write down, on the back of your receipt, had lunch with this person, right? This is, I've never done that, of course. So IRS, take it easy on us. But my point here is that, there's the tax code is a mess. And so what we're talking about is basically a reporting violation. So we'll see where this goes. Now, New York Attorney General Letitia James, we've talked a lot about Letitia James here, said that the indictment is an important marker in the ongoing criminal investigation. She also says the investigation will continue. We're going to follow the facts and the law wherever they may lead. So let's take a look at, remember Letitia James? Remember this gal? She actually ran for office promising to target the president and his family. So you see this Chiron down there at the bottom. Here she is getting sworn in. And this is from CNN back whenever she got sworn in. This was a while ago. But it says New York Attorney General vows to target the president and his family. So she actually got elected on this, on the basis of this. She's here from the New York Times or CBS News, whatever we just covered, out there sort of doing a victory celebration. She ran for office promising this. She vows she's being sworn in to target the president and his family. And it's not just the Chiron. Listen to this woman. Here she is.
Sworn in on Tuesday, do solemnly swear, has made clear that among her biggest targets will be sworn in on Tuesday, do solemnly swear, has made clear that among her biggest targets will be President Trump and his business practices.
I will never be afraid to challenge this illegitimate president.
After all.
So remember that? That was the facial twitch, Letitia, illegitimate president. She's very upset about this so much that it actually contorts her face like the dark side kind of a thing. So she also, recall this, until they got to this moment today. They're very excited about it today. I've been getting a little bit vulgar on the show, kind of, using some, self-gratification language, because that's what it has felt like for a long time. You've had Michael Cohen, you've had Stelter, you've had all of these people sort of in mainstream left side of the aisle going out there every day. Trump's going to get indicted. It's coming any day now. The clock is ticking, and just very excited about it. Sort of, very exciting themselves over this stuff. And here today, we sort of are this is it. It's a reporting charge, and you didn't even get Donald Trump himself. You just got the CFO and for non-reporting stuff. Let's see what's in here. And recall, this has been going on for some time. So they've been scrounging around in the gutter to try to find whatever they can for the Trump administration. They even went so far back in May to actually subpoena the guy's grandkids' schools. So New York prosecutors, they subpoenaed an elite private school that was attended by Allen Weisselberg's grandkids. Okay, that's how kind of insane these prosecutors are. They have such a derangement syndrome. They have such a sort of a frothing at the mouth that they can't help themselves but just go after their political enemies. She ran for office on that basis. CNN acknowledges it in their Chiron. We've got documented stories. They're going after his grandkids at their private schools just to check the records. You know, it's not political or anything like that. We just want to do our due diligence. We would certainly do this to anybody over at CNN or anybody over at Amazon or Facebook. Certainly, we would do a deep dive investigation if it were not our political enemies, but it just happens to be. It's a weird coincidence. Other than that, you know, let's just let us do our jobs. Okay, we're good, wholesome prosecutors here. Now, of course, we know Donald Trump responded to this previously May 19th after they started to basically scour through the guy's grandkids' schools. He said that there's nothing here more corrupt than an investigation that is in desperate search of a crime, which is exactly what this is. It's a corrupt investigation that is in desperate search of a crime. So Trump nails it on that. Here are some pictures from the proceeding today. This is inside the court building. So, you know, some are masked, some are not masked. This is Allen Weisselberg. And so you'll notice as we go through this, there's a lot of sort of, this building it's funny. If you spend time in courtrooms, they all sort of look the same to you. We have a courtroom here in Phoenix, the Central Court building that looks exactly like this. It's funny. They all sort of look the same. Here's them coming out of the courtroom. So Weisselberg is here. We got a whole entourage, right? Number of different guards. It's a big political prosecution. They just like to really milk this thing. And that's where we're at. Let's take a look at the indictment. Here, this is coming out. The people of the state of New York versus, let's take a look, against the Trump organization, the Trump Corporation doing business as the Trump organization, the Trump Payroll Corp, the Trump organization, and Allen Weisselberg. So you know who's not on that list? Donald Trump, right? The former president of the United States. So kind of anticlimactic. You know, you expect after all that effort, all that work, just having a lot of real sort of vigor and energy in celebrating this investigation. Here we get, they don't even have Donald Trump. All right, well, that's kind of a letdown, isn't it? The grand jury of New York, by this indictment, accuses Trump and Allen Weisselberg of the crime of the scheme to defraud in the first degree. Oh my gosh, that's just horrendous. So the defendants now, they engaged in a scheme constituting a systematic, ongoing course of conduct with the intent to defraud more than one person and blah, 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 right? U.S. IRS, New York Department of Revenue, Finance, blah, blah, blah. The defendant is the Trump Organization. It's a trade name. There's a revocable trust. They're located on Fifth Avenue, New York. They call it Trump Tower. Trump Corporation serves as the employer of senior managers, including Allen Weisselberg. We've got corporation. Weisselberg works for them. These senior managers oversee many of the operating entities doing business as the Trump Organization. They're all based in Trump Tower. And if you've been following Trump for any length of time, you know that people in these positions, they have sort of, you know, hundreds of corporations. And so there's a lot to manage there. It sounds like Trump had that same sort of setup in order to, you know, defray liability and for some tax benefits. And the point of this is saying that there is a lot of moving parts here. Okay. I run a small business in Scottsdale, Arizona. We have about 4 employees, I think now. And it's a big job. Okay. It's a big job to, you know, we have a CFO, we have a bookkeeper. My business partner handles a lot of that. We have business coaches and a lot of eyeballs. We have a financial firm to sort of help with all of this stuff so that we don't run afoul of the rules. And we just have one company, right? Not hundreds of them, not billions of dollars in revenue. We're you know, a small operation here, but there's a lot of compliance costs, right? This thing can easily get complicated. And I'm not saying that to make an excuse for Trump or his organization at all. I'm just sort of trying to provide some context. All of these corporations are being housed and held under one umbrella corporation taking place in the Trump Tower. So as the employer of Weisselberg and other managers, Trump Corporation was obligated to report taxes, of course. It was also required to withhold and pay taxes, all right? At all relevant times, the Trump Corporation delegated its obligation to other people, the Trump Payroll Corporation. So, you know, when I'm not a corporate lawyer, but when you start layering on different layers, what you're trying to do is sort of create some room there so that if somebody tries to sue you, they sue one organization and then, that organization would absorb the liability and it wouldn't spread out into other potential corporations where maybe they would be able to access those bank accounts or recover under a lawsuit in that regard. So Trump Organization, so we're not going to handle the payroll stuff. That's going to go over to the payroll company. Trump Payroll Corp then is now an organization also in the Trump Tower, also run by the staff. Trump also uses W-2 forms. They file income tax, all that stuff. Weisselberg, now we get to paragraph 3, is now and at all relevant times the CFO of the Trump Corporation. Weisselberg has worked for Trump since 1973, been its CFO, comptroller before that. At all times, he had the authority over accounting functions, including its payroll. So he supervised the comptroller of the Trump Organization, managed day-to-day affairs and accounting, including payroll and other things. At all times, Weisselberg was authorized to act on behalf of Trump Corp and Trump Payroll Corp to formulate policy and to supervise subordinate employees, blah, blah, blah. As such, he served a high managerial agent of the Trump Organization. So that's what they need to do, is they're sort of saying, oh, who's responsible for all of this? They're trying to connect it back up to Weisselberg. They say, look, he the comptroller reported to him. He had to deal with, payroll. He was sort of responsible for all of the employees in a managerial capacity, or at least it was delegated down to the comptroller, who would subsume most of those responsibilities. So now that they've sort of identified who they believe to be the culprit, the next question is, what was the scheme? What was the conduct that they think was inappropriate? So it says here now, beginning from at least 2005 to on or about June 30, 2021, 16 years, defendant and others operated a scheme for defrauding. The purpose was to compensate Weisselberg and other Trump executives in a manner that was, quote, off the books. Beneficiaries of the scheme received substantial portions of their income through indirect or disguised means and compensation that was unreported to the Trump Corp or payroll. The scheme was intended to allow certain employees to understate their compensation so that they could pay and did pay less taxes, right? So the idea here is you make $100,000 a year, right? And so you have to pay taxes on the income that you receive from the organization. So let's say Weisselberg receives $100,000 a year. Great. So he's being compensated appropriately. Maybe, they justify that some way. Don't think about the numbers. But if it's just $100,000, he gets $100,000. He's got to pay taxes on that. Fine. We all understand that. What if Donald Trump's organization said, well, we're just going to pay you $100,000 on paper, but you also get to, live in this house, and you also get to drive this car, and you also get to go on these vacations, and your grandkids get to go to this school and all of that stuff. Well, what then? Do you count those benefits as income? And if the answer is yes, they are income, then that has to be reportable. You got to pay taxes on those benefits you receive. So if the kid's tuition was 20 grand and that residence would have rented at, 100 grand a year and whatever, you add all those up, well, you got to pay taxes on those benefits. Here, what they're saying is that the CFO essentially wasn't doing that, was allowing this scheme to go on where people would go and they'd go on a vacation, but it was kind of, that benefit was more analogous to income than it is to some sort of a fringe benefit that people just get on the fringes, right? It's not something that the IRS considers to be actual income. It's just like, oh, you did a great job. Here are a couple tickets to the movies. You go to the movies. You don't report that as income. It's kind of a fringe benefit, right? And I don't know what the rule is on the movies, so don't quote me on that. But that's what they're saying is happening here. Okay, I'm not a tax lawyer. I took tax in law school, and it was a very, very interesting class, largely because it is so convoluted how messed up the tax code is. I mean, really, in my perspective, the tax code is even, I don't know if it's worse than the criminal code, but it's just as bad. I make this point here regularly that you can be convicted you can be charged with a crime for virtually anything, right? We make this point all the time. You drive to the office, you've committed like 3 crimes, you don't even know it. And I mean that seriously. People don't recognize how much activity is criminalized in this country. They just have no idea. Same thing with the tax code. It is it's actually, I would say, more complicated in many ways than the criminal code, because the criminal code is kind of straightforward, right? What is assault? Well, it's you made contact with somebody, it put them in apprehension of imminent physical injury, and there was a physical contact and there was harm, and we can kind of decipher that. With tax code, you're talking about all these deductions and above the line and below the line and all sorts of, very, very sort of abstract financial concepts that most Americans have no idea what the hell you're even talking about. So, the criminal code is complicated. And so now we're going to create another code that's sort of layered on top of that, that's even more complicated, that people are even less adept at understanding and deciphering just due to the nature of the subject matter. We're talking about a major ability for the government to go through it and find that you violated it for essentially whatever reason they want. When I was in law school, I bought the digital version of our tax book, and then I printed them out for some reason. I don't know why I did this, but I did this, and it was 2 binders about this big. All right. So the papers, of course, were thicker because I printed them. If they would have been a textbook, it probably would have been smaller. But that was just the textbook. Okay. That was not the criminal, or I'm sorry, the tax code. And it was also not the tax regulations, which is a whole separate thing. So it is so beyond convoluted. I can't even explain it. As somebody who's studied it in law, as somebody who has to pay a lot of them for all of our employees in our organization, and I know what a huge burden it is on us and others. So let's see what else is going on here. Let's see. It says further, the scheme involved the failure of the Trump organization to withhold income taxes. The scheme also allowed Trump and the organization to evade payment of payroll taxes that it was required to pay, right? So if these benefits are being handed out, if they're saying, go live in this house, go drive this car, well, Trump organization as the purveyor of that benefit, as the organization that is doling that out, they've got to be the ones who say, well, that is sort of income, and so we're going to categorize it as income and then tax it appropriately, or at least withhold the taxes so that we can pay them to the government. The government wants their money. 5 says one of the largest beneficiaries of the defendant's scheme was Weisselberg. So during the operation, defendants, so Trump organization, arranged for Weisselberg to receive indirect employee compensation in $1.76 million. How did he do it? Enabled him to receive compensation in ways that enabled the corporate defendants, so the Trump org, to avoid reporting it to the tax authorities, and that did not result in the withholding of income tax by the Trump organization. Weisselberg then concealed the compensation from his tax preparer and intentionally omitted it from his tax returns. Okay, so that is a troubling sentence right there. And I'm curious to see what evidence they've got. Okay, what does that intentionally mean, right? Do they have an email from Weisselberg saying, no, don't count that as compensation? Something like that. Mr. Weisselberg, this is your CPA, this is your tax attorney. I need to know what you want me to do with this income. I think that this is a taxable benefit. I'm not going to be able to file this as a fringe benefit, and I need to know what you want me to do about this. And if Weisselberg responds back and says, "Oh no, file that as a fringe benefit. I don't want to pay income taxes on that." That's intentional, obviously, right? You don't even have to argue about that. But do they have that? Honestly, I don't know. They're saying they do. They're saying they've got some evidence that his tax preparer, that Weisselberg concealed it from the tax preparer and also intentionally omitted it from his tax returns. Okay, so we're gonna check in a little about preview of what's coming up, but we're gonna be checking in with Donald Rumsfeld. He just passed away, 88 years old. And he has an issue with taxes as well. So we're going to see what that looks like. But, we've got a lot of moving parts. I already explained that we've got a bookkeeper, a CPA. We've got all sorts of different financial advisors and all sorts of different people. And the thing that's interesting about this is people have a lot of differing opinions on this. You might talk to one CPA, he says, no, that's questionable. If you did it this way, then I would say that was this classification of a tax. And if you did it this way, well, I would say it's this classification. And you could take that same issue and go to another tax lawyer, and they would give you that same analysis, because the law literally is so convoluted, it's not even funny. Same thing with any lawyer, right? You can go to a criminal lawyer. Happens all the time at our firm. People call us and they say, hey, I spoke to this other law firm and they said that I'm totally screwed. There's nothing that we can do. They've seen many of these cases. They know the prosecutor and the judge, and we're just out of luck. And we say, well, that's insane, because that's not accurate at all. We help people through these cases all the time, and they hire us and we get them a great outcome. And it's because there are differing opinions about different legal situations, right? In law school, we kind of joke about this. What is the only answer to any legal solution that ever has existed ever? If you're in law school, you know what it is. The answer is, it depends. It always depends. You can always make arguments both ways. And so, the government, this is why we have these big, high standards, is this burden of proof that says the government has to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. They've got to make that showing, right? It's like 80%, if you want to use that figure, more likely than not is not good enough. It's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So they've got to prove that it was intentionally omitted from his tax returns. They've got to show that maybe there's no real justification for that. And I think the defense there is probably going to be pretty easy. We'll see. I'm not sure. Weisselberg concealed for years the fact that he was a resident of New York, was required to pay New York City income taxes. Okay, so like you can debate that, right? What is a resident of New York? How much time did he spend there? Did they really go through? Are they going to be able to make that case? Maybe he had a residence someplace else, a residence in a different state with lower taxes, right? A lot of people do that. They have a place in Florida. They travel back and forth between New York and Florida, go down there for the summer, back up to New York. So they're saying, well, you're a resident. And his attorneys are saying, no, I wasn't. So I'm not concealing anything because I wasn't actually a resident. During that period of time, this says, he evaded $556,000 of federal taxes, 106 in state taxes, adding up the numbers, saying he was not entitled to not keep those, to keep that money. Now, here is the Trump organization. So they're responding back. They're saying he's a loving and devoted husband, father and grandfather. Yeah, he sent his kids to a nice school, worked at the Trump organization for 48 years. He's now being used by the Manhattan District Attorney as a pawn in a scorched earth campaign, an attempt to harm the former president. The district attorney is bringing a criminal prosecution involving employee benefits that neither the IRS nor other district attorney would ever think of bringing. This is not justice. This is politics. And I actually couldn't agree more. It feels to me like this has been a long exercise in just a political prosecution. And finally, they're getting to this very, very unsatisfactory climax. But I hope they certainly enjoyed themselves. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Donald Rumsfeld. Why are we talking about Donald Rumsfeld here? Well, he just passed away. Doesn't really have much to do with Trump's taxes or the Trump organization or Allen Weisselberg. But I want to pause on here because he wrote a very, very interesting letter to the IRS in 2016 that I think it's worth mentioning here. So Donald Rumsfeld, as we know, he passed away. He was a former Secretary of Defense, died 88 years old. So they call him here over at CNN the acerbic architect of the Iraq War. A master Washington power player, was the Secretary of Defense for 2 presidents, died. Pugnacious businessman, bureaucrat, lawmaker, he helped drag victims out of the burning Pentagon on September 11th. The Al-Qaeda attacks heralded the war on terror, and he directed and ultimately ended his political career when they went sour. Rumsfeld died surrounded by his family. No cause of death was provided. A longtime associate of Dick Cheney and George Bush, etc., served also for President Gerald Ford, right? So that's who he is. Now, I came across this very recently, and I just sort of laughed out loud. Okay, that's who that person was, right? Secretary of Defense, 2 presidents, somebody who was a businessman, bureaucrat, former lawmaker, dragged people out of the Pentagon, okay? Political career, served under President Bush, served under Gerald Ford, former associate of Vice President Dick Cheney, was in the cabinet during that administration, somebody who's been around for a long time, okay? Extremely accomplished, call him smart or whatever. He doesn't really know what to do about taxes either. It's convoluted. He sends this letter back on April 15th, 2016. So he drafts this from Donald Rumsfeld. He sends this directly over to the IRS. Okay, 10th Street over in Washington, D.C. He says, look, dear sir or madam, once again, I have mailed in our federal income tax and gift tax filings for 2015, and I've requested an extension due to the delays in materials required to complete our tax return. He says, well, despite having performed this civic duty for over half a century, at the conclusion of filing this year's taxes, I remain mystified as to whether or not our tax returns and tax payment estimates are accurate. Doesn't even know. The possession of a college degree, retention of an experienced tax accounting firm, and the earnest application have failed to provide confidence that my returns and my payments are properly completed. It says, evidently, I am not alone in my concern. Millions of Americans find the U.S. tax code and the forms to be so complex that they will individually pay between several hundred to several $1,000s a year to hire a professional to help them file their taxes. A fundamental and annual civic duty should not be so laborious and costly for the average American. He says, I hope at some point in my lifetime, that I am now in my 80s, the U.S. government will radically simplify the tax code, possibly even institute a flat tax, so all those willing to pay what is required are able to do so with confidence that they have done so correctly. If you have questions, our tax accountant can be in touch with you to provide any additional information you may require. Sincerely, Donald Rumsfeld. I have no idea what the hell the IRS does, he says. I have no idea. What do you want me to do here? I filled it out. I've been doing it for 80 years. I would love to die knowing that this reprehensible code has been dealt with. Fortunately, that did not happen. Rumsfeld passed away. We still have the current tax code. Now, let's take a look at what Jonathan Turley has to say. Jonathan Turley, of course, very estimable lawyer, been around a little bit longer than I have, has a little bit more familiarity with some of the tax code, right? I know how criminal law works pretty well, I'd say, and not so much with the tax stuff, but other attorneys certainly have been around a while. I can always shoot from the hip. I took tax law. I don't like paying taxes. I know enough about it to deal with it. But let's see what Jonathan Turley has to say. So on Twitter, Jonathan Turley says, well, for a trophy prosecution, nailing a 73-year-old man for not reporting car and apartment benefits is not enough to mount, let alone brag about. right? So he's talking about Weisselberg. He says these cases tend to be easy to prove for failing to report income, but he says they are overwhelmingly addressed as civil matters, right? IRS comes through. They say, hey, you've got this delinquency. You have this offer and compromise, rectification. I actually did some tax law for about 9 months when I was an intern my second year in law school. So I know a little bit about it, but you have this offer and compromise. IRS says, hey, you owe us $500,000. You say, well, I don't have it. And they say, well, what do you have? Let me look at your assets. Let's schedule this payment plan, and sort of you pay back your taxes. And you may even be able to compromise a much lower reduced payment, right? So rather than the $500,000, you reduce it down to, $250,000, you pay it over 5 years. IRS says, all right, that's good enough. Don't do it again. And you sort of work things out that way. That didn't happen here, obviously, right? Criminal charges, they're not pursuing this as a civil matter. Allegations like the payment of tuition are the strongest claims of taxable benefits, but it's not clear if his team has anything more meaty to charge, right? Anything else other than that? The charges against the Trump organization are exceptionally rare, he says, as the sole basis for a criminal case. It certainly seems more of a retaliation for failing to give incriminating material, as well as pressure to flip on Trump. Very good observation. However, not only is this a threat of a year in jail, it is extremely unlikely to result in jail time for a first offender, even if this bloated prosecution effort can secure this conviction in the first place, which I have some doubt about. The case seems more like a thrill kill prosecution in terms of its real size and significance. These cases tend to be easy to prove. We already read that. The issue for me comes down to these lines, right? Weisselberg then concealed the compensation for his tax preparer. The same line I mentioned previously. We already read that. It says this could be spinning the failure to disclose as concealment, right? Or something more intentional, which we don't know. That type of conduct obviously makes the violations more serious if proven in a criminal prosecution. So is it just a misclassification, or is it intentionally hiding the income? I don't know. We'll see how that works. Let's take a look at some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. First one in the house comes over from Thunder7. Hey, Thunder says, hey, Rob, love your show and learning about the basic legal details. Nobody is surprised at the Allen charge. The Dems have been searching for a crime for 4 years. There is nothing there, or they would have found it by now, don't you think? Yeah, I do. I mean, they would have found it a long time ago if there was something there. Remember, they were grinding down Trump and the entire family all throughout 2019. And we know that even the Obama administration and all of the Michael Flynn and the Carter Page and the two FBI lovers and all of that was going on. They have access to all of the inside information, right? Tucker Carlson is saying that they're creeping on him. Did they do the same thing to the Trump administration? There's a lot of evidence that says, yeah, they absolutely did. And so you would imagine that they would have been able to find something in there, right? It's like sort of like having access to somebody's closet, right? Or their locker, going in, let's see what you got in here. Let's see what creams you got and all this, these kind of, you have to use that. That's kind of weird. So, one of those things. The FBI gets to see it all. And they've got Biden in there now, and apparently they're looking at Tucker, and so I don't think there's anything there, but it's just political, of course. Savdi says, this may be similar to what Thunder 7 suggested. Do you think going after Allen is a result of not being able to find something on Trump himself? Yeah, so yes, right? So, I sort of explained this on yesterday's show, but there'll be situations where prosecutors will use one, and I didn't explain that in the Trump context, but there'll be situations where prosecutors will see the big prize, right? The big fish that they want to go latch onto. And so they got to work their way up there, right? And they got to go start at the bottom, find the receptionist. Okay, receptionist implicates the assistant implicates the manager implicates the executive assistant, who implicates the CFO, who implicates Trump, right? They're working their way up there. And every time they work their way up, they want to exert some leverage on that next tier. And so now they get to Allen Weisselberg. He's a CFO, right? He's certainly going to be the guy that's going to turn on Trump. They were supposed to get it from Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer. Didn't have anything there either, right? Apparently that guy's like, singing like a bird. And so now they've got all his archives, anything that he had on Trump, and they still don't have anything. So now they're trying to get it from Weisselberg because Cohen failed. They couldn't get anything from Weisselberg. So they go, all right, jerk, you're not going to give us anything on the big guy? That's fine. We're going to prosecute you. 15 counts of whatever this is. And we're going to implicate the organization because it's a political prosecution. They are mad at him and they're going to make him pay the consequences for it. It's disgusting that this happens in our justice system. That is not justice. That is political attacks. It is political persecutions. Okay, this happens in insane other countries around the world. And it's now happening here because a lot of other things are happening here as well. We've got Want to Know says, what do you think about Kamala's bad work environment? No one likes her kind of like the witch in the Wizard of Oz. Not even the monkeys or the guards liked her. Treated like prisoners. Oh, no, I can't do Wizard of Oz analogies with Kamala Harris because that would probably make me a racist and a bigot and a woman hater or something. I don't know, all of the things. But it's a funny comment, Want to Know. I think that it is absolutely expected. I got a little bit of glee reading that because we all know it's true, right? She's kind of a miserable person just in general. She makes fun of prisoners. There was an interview where she was like, mocking them, saying, oh, like they're begging for food and water. And she put her hands out like this, like they're begging for water. Oh, please, sir. These are people incarcerated. She was the attorney general and a prosecutor over in California. So I don't think that she has much empathy and human compassion. And so it certainly shows in her office over in the vice president's wing of the White House. Sharon Quidney says, no doubt about it. This is a political persecution, a witch hunt. These people will never give up until they manage to concoct something, anything to get Trump and his organization supporters, thus giving meaning to new trumped up charges. Yeah, I like that. Why didn't I think of that? Trumped up charges. That's pretty good. I like that. Good to see you, Sharon. Want to Know says, aren't prosecutors supposed to review cases, not prosecute frivolous cases, dismiss unprosecutable cases? Is this against prosecutable law or ethics? Could Trump run a campaign and promise of having the FBI and the IRS investigate her? Great questions, Want to Know. Yeah, prosecutors are supposed to swear an oath and then follow that oath, right? To only do justice, to only prosecute where cases have probable cause, to not make things about politics or about personal vendettas. And this certainly doesn't resemble that to me, right? Jonathan Turley came out and he said, nope, that's kind of out of the ordinary. I don't see people calling us all the time for tax reporting problems as a criminal violation because most of this stuff is handled civilly. And so, what can Trump do about it? If the problem here is that, it's sort of a double-edged, it's not the right way to say it. There's a Pandora's box that's going to be opened up a little bit here, which is very, very concerning to me. You start to have these political prosecutions take place. Guess what's going to happen next, right? The Republicans, when they're in charge and something like this happens, they're going to do the same thing. And I'm going to oppose that as well. It's not appropriate. Political prosecutions in criminal law is not appropriate. You're supposed to prosecute those cases in the court of public opinion. That's what elections are for. So it's not about sort of, I'm not opposed to rooting out corruption or investigating where it needs to be investigated, but this is not the crime of the century. This had nothing to do at all with anything that Trump did in office. This is a private business. They were doing the same thing that every other company does. They're not going after Amazon or Facebook or Twitter or any of the people that are friendly organizations. They're going after a political rival, and it's reprehensible. And if the Republicans do it, I'm going to condemn that as well. The criminal courts are not supposed to be used for that. It's a very sacred process. Okay, we're talking about taking people's lives and liberty away from them. It's a big deal. And so to just make this about making sure that your political enemy doesn't run again because you don't like his policy positions on whatever, immigration or something like that, is insane. This guy's life is going to be up in flames for the foreseeable future. He's facing, some serious consequences for something that is relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. Now, I'm Not Gas says, I exclusively follow John McAfee for tax advice. I'm not suicidal, FYI. That's good. I'm not either. I'm Not Gas. I'm definitely not. And apparently John McAfee wasn't either. Maybe. Who knows? All right. So that's a great comment. So obviously don't follow John McAfee for tax advice. Well, maybe you can, if you want to live that lifestyle. He lived a pretty interesting life. There are consequences, though, for following John McAfee's tax advice. John McAfee, man, what a story that was. We didn't really spend much time on that, but rest in peace there, John McAfee. John McAfee was a pretty memorable figure for me. I remember growing up talking about McAfee antivirus software. Maybe I did talk about this on the show. I was sort of like an antivirus sort of, we called them proggers, right, back in the AOL days, where you would sort of program these programs in Visual Basic, and you'd go into these chat rooms and you'd sort of create these chat bombs, and you could create these instant message bombs on AOL Instant Messenger. Remember AIM, any of you 90s kids? And you would go on there and you could create these programs that would send these instant message bombs across the internet, and it would actually log you off of AOL. Like if you got this, it would be like a strangely formatted text that would crash the AOL server or the software that was being run on your computer. And so people would send you text messages and it would log you off. And back in the 90s, that was a big deal. You had to like dial back in, you dial in on the phone and it would connect you. It'd take like 5 minutes and then somebody would instant message bomb you and all that stuff. And anyway, so John McAfee at that time, it was the McAfee antivirus software, and they were sort of scanning for all of these progs and all these different things. And so I was very interested in that space. Sort of a cat and mouse game was going on online, and I was probably way too young to be in that space, but here we are, we made it. So John McAfee, rest in peace. What a great comment. All right, Speech Unleashed is here, says, did you know that the IRS cannot even be held liable for any errors in their tax instructions, which caused a person to pay the wrong amount in taxes? There have been several court cases where that has happened and the court has ruled in favor of the IRS. Yeah, so it doesn't surprise me at all. It sort of resembles a qualified immunity type of thing, right? The police, well, it's not their fault. They're the police. They're allowed to do those things. IRS, well, you kind of screwed up the errors in your tax instructions. Not our fault, right? We're the government. You can't sue us. What are you, nuts? All right. Soul Viking says, although Letitia, all right. There we go. All right. Although Letitia, with her endless budget and aspirations, will go hard, like you mentioned with the layers, once again, this will not touch Donald Trump. I totally agree. I don't think it's going to go anywhere against Donald Trump. They're all very excited about it. But as I said, very anticlimactic. We've got Jeremy says, if they find anything worth noting, he should thank them for finding discrepancies they were able to take care of. It's not like heaping hot coals on their head. Right. It's like, okay, we misclassified this. How much do we owe? $700,000. I think they said $500,000 here. Okay, here you go. Go away, right? That's how most of these things are dealt with. Not this one, though. Why? Because it's Trump, and it's the Trump organization. We've got Sharon Quidney says, the Dems are going right by the playbook of Lavrentiy Beria, which is Stalin's secret police henchman. I've never heard of that name. That's interesting. Who famously said, show me the man, and I'll show you the crime. Wow, that's amazing. I have not heard that. I've not even heard that name. I'm going to read about that later. Thank you, Sharon. Gosh, I love this show. It's amazing. We have Kenny 1B says, a jury will find him guilty just because he worked for the Trump organization. Yep. Unfortunately, beyond the reasonable doubt standard no longer applies if you're white male or a Trump employee. It's true, right? It's true. And this is what I've been saying about the weaponization of the justice system. The juror number 56, Brandon, what was his name? Brandon Mitchell, was that his name? I think it might have been that. But he sort of elbowed his way to get on that jury to effectuate a specific outcome. I think that is without any question, right? There are several images of him with the George Floyd, get your knee off of our neck shirt on, and he's at protests, on podcasts, doing those things. And he makes comments after the Chauvin verdict came out about African Americans needing to get onto juries. We need to get on there to effectuate social change. And you say, that's not justice at all. You can get a bunch of New Yorkers who become jurors and they want to incriminate Weisselberg. But guess what happens when we let this standard slide? When we say this line in the sand can be crossed, if we say that the Democrats can do this, they can go and make sure that they can weaponize political criminal trials. And so the Republicans are going to do that too. Folks, it may be a natural consequence. There may be nothing we can do to prevent that from happening. If one side exercises that weapon, the other side's going to respond in kind. Do you know who gets hurt? Everyday Americans, everyday people like you and me, those of us who just want to live our lives. Okay, these politicians are prosecuting the hell out of each other, having this political, high school drama with each other because they're incompetent, power-hungry egomaniacs. And what ends up happening is we start to see this over-criminalization that then trickles down to everybody else. And it hits people. If you start seeing weaponized jurors, listen, if you say that we have weaponized jurors and half the country are racist white males, how do you think a jury is going to respond if they feel that one particular ideology is punishing white people like Derek Chauvin, for example, hypothetically, and we sort of reverse that, right? What if all these white racists that we keep hearing so much about get on juries and they start effectuating the other way? They just start incriminating African Americans or Hispanics, right? If this is really the premise that they're operating under, it's not okay. People on both sides, innocent people who should not be caught in the blast zone of this political prosecution, both directions, it's going to hurt real people. And, people like our company, our office, our team, we have to help deal with the catastrophe of this constant over-criminalization. People's lives are being ruined, and there's half of this country that's like, yeah, good, get him, Trump's the worst, man, get him out of there. You go, what? My friend, the next time this happens, this could be to you. This could be to somebody that you care about. It's a political prosecution based on policy, not based on actual criminality. And somebody's going to respond and say, well, it was criminal. Look at the code, look at the statute. Yes, I know, because everything is criminal, literally everything. As Sharon Quinny just said, La Vitri Beria, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. There it is, right? It's exactly right. It's a profound statement. Furby Slayers in the house says, Turley nails it. If this was a Dem, it would be a fine and a slap on the wrist. Several high-profile members of Congress had many recent tax issues they did not do too much about. The court should remove the AG from any involvement. No, yeah, they should. I mean, they should absolutely, based on that statement that she's running for office to go prosecute somebody, right? And that's, in my opinion, prosecutorial misconduct. It is a conflict of interest. Clearly, she's got a hard conflict there, and she's been involved in this and spearheading it. And, this is what they're going after, a $500,000 delinquent tax bill. They got Andrew Cuomo with like 10 legitimate complaints from women saying that he sexually assaulted them. And this attorney general and this whatever city prosecutor, they're both like, well, what are we going to do about that? But Donald Trump over there, man, he's right. They are picking and choosing based on their political ideology and political leanings, and it's reprehensible. I think they should all they should all pay the consequences at the ballot box. And this goes for Republicans too. Republicans who get in office and start trying to prosecute their political enemies are as reprehensible as the Democrats, and I will take that to the bank across the board. All right. D.K. Poor says, hey, Rob, do you think this will somehow backfire at the Dems now that this is getting obvious to the American people on both sides that the Dems are using their power against their opponents? I do think so. I think that we talk a lot about the pendulum swing in both directions, right? And there is going to be, I think, a response to this. I think the Democrats largely overplayed their hands, continuing to talk about January 6th like they almost seized America is now looking ridiculous, right? It looked ridiculous the entire time, but it's looking ridiculous. And we're starting to see sort of a crack in the facade, I think, just in general, sort of a general distrust in the government. I saw something, did we talk about this? I'm sort of mixing worlds. I might have posted this on Twitter. I can't recall. But there was a poll out from the Trafalgar Group, a good polling organization that came out and said recently that they were having conversations about whether Americans now think that they today have more freedom or less freedom than pre-COVID. And something like I posted this on Twitter, something like 57% of people say that they have less freedom. And I was like shocked, like only 57%. That's crazy, right? We absolutely have a lot less freedom monetarily. You've got, we went through a whole period where you actually couldn't leave your house, right? People couldn't go to churches. People can't say what they used to say anymore on the internet and things like that. So freedoms have certainly been diminished. And I think that when we juxtapose that with the other things that we see, like a lot of questions about Wuhan and about Biden's capacity, right? They told us that, oh, he's great. Look at him. He's riding a bike. He's got a lot of vigor over there. Okay. And we all are just sort of seeing it going, that's not right. Even Joe Rogan's out there. That we all know he's out of his mind. Okay. When you sort of lose people that are that mainstream, you're going to start to see some shifts in the general populace as well. You and I, all of us here on this channel, we've been seeing it for a long time. But now it's sort of trickling down into the masses. And I think that there will be a little bit of a shift the other direction, right? What we're seeing here is pretty plain and obvious. And I think that when more people wake up, we'll see the consequences of that. We've got Nadarb says, didn't the MOAG get punished for doing exactly what this NYAG is doing to Trump and the couple that held guns outside of the house? Yeah, so that was the McCloskeys. Missouri AG. What did the Missouri do? Yeah, I mean, there are, so I don't recall. So the other prosecutor, that was Kim Garner, right? Out of, was that Louisiana? The McCloskeys, where were they out of? Yeah, it was down there in the South. I can't recall where it was. But, some of the remediations are prosecutorial misconduct or malicious prosecution, sort of the same thing. But there's also some just general ethical violations that you could file against really any attorney if you wanted to go that route. So I'm not sure if there are going to be any consequences for any of them. But the Trump organization, now we know, of course, facing criminal charges. If you or somebody you know or love is also facing criminal charges, our law firm would love the opportunity to help. There's a lot that we can do. We help people with felonies, DUIs, drug charges, even traffic violations. We have a lot of criminal traffic laws here in Arizona. We have criminal speeding here. You can just be speeding. Boom, it's a crime. Class 3 misdemeanor, 30 days jail. It's kind of insane, but we have a lot of that here. So my point is, if you know anybody that needs some help, we've got a whole amazing team of people in Scottsdale. We would love the opportunity to help. 480-787-0394 for that. Now, if you don't need any actual legal representation, there may be some information that might be useful to you. I invite you to go check out my gumroad.com/Robert Gruler page and specifically take a look at this law enforcement interaction training. It's a 2.5-hour workshop. Just go take a look at it. There's a lot of information. Once you click this, it'll open it up and tell you all what's in there if you want to check that out. We had our Gruler Method Legal Mastermind today, talked to several other attorneys, including another YouTuber who you probably know about. And we'll see if we can maybe connect and do some work together. But that was a lot of fun. So I want to invite you to go check that out. Gumroad.com/Robert Gruler. And as always, thank you for all your support over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. It really means the world to us that you are helping us to build a separate community, one brick at a time.